Lightning split the black Colorado sky, illuminating the rugged mountains for only an instant before darkness swallowed them again. We can almost hear the steady drum of rain against a weathered canvas wagon as the lonely freight road disappears beneath muddy wagon tracks. Most travelers had already found shelter for the night, but one cowboy continued onward, trusting his faithful horses more than the storm. Jacob Carter pulled the collar of his faded brown trail coat higher against the cold rain. His black cowboy hat dripped steadily as he guided his freight wagon around another bend carved into the mountainside. The crates and supplies beneath the heavy canvas cover creaked with every jolt of the wheels, while flashes of lightning revealed endless forests of pine stretching toward the distant Rockies. Jacob had spent years hauling supplies between isolated ranches and frontier towns. The trail had taught him many lessons, but perhaps the greatest was this: storms always passed. Until they did, a man simply kept moving. Then, just as another clap of thunder rolled across the valley, he heard something unexpected. A voice. Soft, frightened. Please. Jacob immediately pulled back on the reins. The horses slowed to a stop. For a long moment, only the rain answered him. He listened carefully. Again came the trembling whisper from somewhere inside the covered wagon. Please, don't leave me. Jacob climbed down slowly, one boot sinking into the muddy road. His hand rested near his holster out of habit, though he had never been quick to draw a gun. Caution had kept him alive longer than speed ever could. He walked quietly to the rear of the wagon. Who's there? He asked in a calm voice. The canvas shifted. A frightened gasp came from inside. Jacob waited without reaching for the cover. I won't hurt you, he said, but I'd surely like to know who's riding in my wagon. Silence lingered. Then trembling fingers slowly lifted the edge of the canvas. A young woman cautiously stepped into the fading light. Her brown wool travel cloak was soaked by the rain, but beneath it, Jacob caught sight of delicate ivory lace torn near the hem of an elegant wedding dress. Her auburn hair had partly escaped its carefully arranged braid, and tears mixed freely with the rain running down her face. She looked scarcely able to remain standing. Jacob removed his hat. Ma'am? She clutched the cloak tightly around herself, her frightened eyes searching his face. Before Jacob could ask another question, she spoke the words that carried more fear than he had ever heard. Please, don't take me back. The plea hung between them as thunder echoed through the mountains. Jacob looked beyond her toward the empty road. No one else was in sight. He turned back to the trembling bride. I don't rightly know who you are, he said quietly, or what brought you into my wagon. She lowered her eyes. I hid there while you were loading supplies outside the church. Understanding slowly crossed Jacob's face. So that's how you got here. She nodded, barely able to breathe. They're looking for me. Jacob studied her torn dress, her muddy shoes, and the bruised fear written across her face. He had met frightened people before. Runaway boys, stranded travelers, widows who had lost everything. But this fear was different. It was the fear of someone running not toward something, but away from it. He spoke with the steady calm that had carried him through countless difficult trails. No one will force you anywhere while you're riding with me. For the first time since stepping from the wagon, the young woman seemed able to breathe. Fresh tears filled her eyes. Thank you. If stories of courage, compassion, and unforgettable moments from the American frontier speak to your heart, we'd be honored to have you join us. Please subscribe and journey with us as we bring more timeless Western stories to life. Jacob climbed back onto the wagon seat and motioned toward the dry space beneath the canvas. You'd best stay out of the rain. She hesitated. I don't even know your name. Jacob Carter. She managed a faint smile. I'm Clara. Jacob gave a small nod, before clicking gently to the horses. The freight wagon rolled forward once again, its wheels cutting fresh tracks through the muddy mountain road. Neither spoke for several minutes. The rain softened to a steady drizzle, while the clouds slowly drifted eastward. Somewhere ahead lay Jacob's small ranch, where a warm stove and a safe roof might offer the frightened bride a chance to think about tomorrow, instead of surviving today. But old trail instincts rarely slept. As they rounded another bend, Jacob instinctively glanced over his shoulder toward the winding road they had just traveled. His expression hardened. Far behind them, 3 riders burst through the lingering rain, urging their horses into a full gallop straight toward the freight wagon. 3 riders burst through the lingering rain, urging their horses into a full gallop straight toward the freight wagon. We can almost hear the pounding hoofbeats echoing through the mountain pass as Jacob Carter narrowed his eyes. He had spent enough years on Colorado's freight trails to recognize determination when he saw it. Those men were not simply traveling the same road. They were hunting someone. Jacob flicked the reins. Easy now. His 2 draft horses surged forward, pulling the wagon faster along the muddy trail. Inside the covered wagon, Clara pulled back the canvas just enough to see Jacob's face. They found us. Jacob kept his eyes ahead. Looks that way. They'll force me back. Not if I can help it. Ahead, the main freight road divided. One trail continued toward the railroad town. The other twisted sharply into a narrow mountain pass used mostly by ranchers and cattle drives. Without hesitation, Jacob turned the wagon onto the smaller trail. The wheels bounced violently over loose rocks as towering pine trees closed around them. Branches brushed against the canvas, while the steep mountainside hid them from the open valley below. The riders reached the fork only moments later. From the wagon seat, Jacob glanced back. The 3 horsemen slowed, uncertain which trail he had taken. For several long seconds, they searched the muddy ground before finally choosing the wider road leading toward town. Jacob didn't slow the horses until the hoofbeats disappeared entirely. Only then did he release a long breath. I reckon we've bought ourselves a little time. Inside the wagon, Clara sat quietly with both hands wrapped around the edge of her cloak. I'm sorry. Jacob looked over his shoulder. For what? For dragging you into this. He gave a faint smile. You climbed into my wagon. A small laugh escaped her despite everything. I suppose I did. The trail gradually widened as sunlight broke through the retreating storm clouds, painting the autumn aspens with brilliant shades of gold. After several peaceful miles, Jacob spoke gently. You don't have to tell me anything. Clara looked down at the torn lace peeking beneath her cloak. But I think I should. She drew a slow breath. My name is Clara Whitmore. Jacob nodded quietly. My father is Henry Whitmore. The name sounded familiar. The banker? Yes. Jacob had heard of him. Henry Whitmore was one of the wealthiest men in the county. I was supposed to marry Edwin Blackwell this morning. She could barely bring herself to say his name. Everyone believed it was a love match. Jacob remained silent. It wasn't. Tears welled again. My father lost a great deal of money after several poor investments. Edwin offered to rescue the family's fortune. She paused. The price was me. Jacob's hands tightened around the leather reins. My father kept saying it was the only way to save everything our family had built. And what did you want? Clara stared toward the mountains rolling past. I wanted the freedom to choose my own life. She looked at the muddy wedding dress beneath her cloak. When the minister opened his Bible, I couldn't do it. Her voice trembled. So while everyone was distracted by the storm outside, I slipped through the back door of the church. Jacob smiled softly. And found my wagon. I prayed the Lord would hide me somewhere. You picked a mighty ordinary freight wagon. She smiled through tears. It became the safest place in the world. By late afternoon, they reached Jacob's modest ranch tucked beneath a line of cottonwood trees. The small log house stood beside a weathered red barn, surrounded by split-rail fences and open pasture stretching toward the foothills. Jacob climbed down first. It isn't fancy. Clara looked around at the peaceful ranch. It feels like freedom. He opened the cabin door. The guest room hasn't had company in years, but it's clean enough. Stay as long as you need. She looked at him in surprise. You don't even know me. Jacob shrugged. I know enough. As the evening settled over the valley, a familiar rider approached through the ranch gate. Sheriff Nathan Briggs. The gray-haired lawman tipped his brown hat as he dismounted. Evening, Jacob. Evening, Sheriff. Nathan's calm eyes rested briefly on Clara before returning to Jacob. "I've been hearing talk all over town about a runaway bride." His voice remained gentle. "I'm not here to drag anyone anywhere." Clara relaxed slightly. The sheriff continued. "I came because rumors have a way of growing faster than the truth." Jacob nodded. "You'll get the truth here." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Clara slowly reached beneath the torn lace lining of her wedding dress. Carefully, she removed a tightly folded legal document she had hidden there before fleeing the church. Carefully, Clara removed a tightly folded legal document she had hidden inside the lining of her wedding dress before fleeing the church. We watched the worn pages rest in her trembling hands as silence settled over Jacob Carter's small ranch house. Even the crackling fire seemed to grow quieter, as though it understood that whatever was written there had changed the course of many lives. Sheriff Nathan Briggs stepped closer. "May I?" Clara nodded. "But first, you should know why I took them." She slowly unfolded the papers across the wooden table. "I found these 3 weeks ago." Jacob leaned forward. They were locked inside Edwin Blackwell's office. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "You were inside his office?" "My father often sent me there to deliver business papers. Edwin never imagined I'd read what was left on his desk." Her voice grew steadier. "At first I thought they were ordinary contracts." She pointed to several signatures. "Then, I noticed something strange." Sheriff Briggs adjusted his spectacles. "The names." Clara nodded. "Families from all across this valley." Jacob recognized several immediately. The Millers, the Harpers, the Dawson Ranch. Every one of them belonged to hard-working ranching families. Clara continued. Edwin wasn't simply marrying into wealth. She turned another page. He was quietly arranging contracts that would allow him to seize neighboring ranches if certain loans were not repaid. Jacob frowned. "But most folks around here have never borrowed enough to lose their land." "Exactly." She revealed another document beneath the first. "Because the loans weren't real." Sheriff Briggs looked carefully at the pages. The amounts were changed after they were signed. Clara nodded again. "My father signed many of these, believing they were ordinary banking renewals." Her eyes filled with sadness. He trusted Edwin completely. Jacob looked toward the window. "So Henry Whitmore never knew?" "I truly believe he didn't." She gently touched her father's signature. Edwin used father's reputation to make everything appear legal. The sheriff carefully examined each page beneath the lantern light. Every correction, every altered figure, every suspicious addition squeezed between neat lines of handwriting. Finally, he looked up. "These documents appear authentic." Hope flickered across Clara's face. "You believe me?" "I do." Sheriff Briggs carefully folded the papers again. "If these contracts are genuine, they're evidence of deliberate fraud." Jacob remained thoughtful. "And if Edwin succeeds, he could slowly control nearly every ranch in this valley," the sheriff finished. The room fell silent. Outside, the evening breeze stirred the cottonwood leaves, while distant cattle lowed across the pasture. Jacob finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" Sheriff Briggs answered honestly. "These papers belong before Judge Eleanor Hastings." Clara looked uneasy. "Everyone will know I ran away." "They will. My father may never forgive me." The sheriff spoke gently. "He may not understand at first." Jacob quietly added, "Sometimes doing what's right costs us the approval of people we love." Clara looked down at the faded lace of her wedding dress. She remembered the church filled with smiling guests, the flowers, the music, her father's hopeful face. For one painful moment, she wondered whether it would be easier to disappear somewhere no one knew her name. But then she remembered the families whose names filled those contracts. Children who could lose the only homes they had ever known. Widows who depended on their small ranches. Honest cowboys who had worked the same land for generations. She slowly lifted her head. "If I stay silent," her voice no longer trembled, "Edwin wins." Sheriff Briggs smiled with quiet respect. "And if you speak, maybe those families keep their homes." Jacob looked at her with admiration. The frightened bride I found in my wagon is beginning to look mighty courageous. A small smile crossed Clara's face. I don't feel brave. You don't have to, Jacob replied. Real courage usually shows up before confidence does. The following morning, Clara carefully placed the documents inside a leather satchel. Sheriff Briggs prepared his horse for the ride into town, while Jacob hitched his wagon, determined that Clara would not face what came next alone. As the courthouse came into view beneath the bright Colorado sky, townspeople gathered outside, whispering about the runaway bride who had vanished on her wedding day. None of them yet knew the truth she carried. Clara took one steadying breath and stepped down from the wagon beside Sheriff Briggs and Jacob. Before they could reach the courthouse steps, another carriage rolled into the square. Its polished black wheels stopped at the entrance. The door opened. Edwin Blackwell stepped onto the street, straightened his elegant black coat, and smiled with complete confidence. Edwin Blackwell stepped onto the street, certain Clara has nowhere left to run. Edwin Blackwell stepped onto the street, straightened his elegant black coat, and smiled with complete confidence. We could almost feel the certainty in his stride as he crossed the courthouse square, convinced the frightened bride had finally reached the end of her escape. But for the first time in many weeks, Clara Whitmore was no longer running. She was ready to speak. Inside the courtroom, Judge Eleanor Hastings took her seat with quiet dignity. The room filled quickly as ranchers, merchants, and townspeople gathered to hear the remarkable story that had spread across the valley. Sheriff Nathan Briggs placed the folded legal documents on the judge's bench. Your Honor, he said, these papers deserve careful examination. Judge Hastings adjusted her spectacles and began reading. The courtroom grew silent. One page became another, then another. Every altered figure, every forged amendment, every hidden clause. She compared the contracts with the original county records brought by the sheriff. When she finally looked up, there was no uncertainty in her voice. These documents reveal a deliberate pattern of fraud. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Edwin immediately rose. Your Honor, those papers were stolen. Judge Hastings calmly raised her hand. The manner in which they were obtained does not erase the evidence they contain. She turned another page. Several contracts were altered after they were signed. Edwin's confident smile disappeared. Judge Hastings continued. Mr. Blackwell knowingly attempted to obtain control of neighboring ranches through fraudulent agreements. Henry Whitmore slowly stood from the spectator's bench. His face had turned pale. You used my signature? Edwin remained silent. You told me these were routine banking renewals. Still no answer came. Henry lowered his head in disbelief. He had trusted the man he intended to welcome into his family. Instead, he had nearly helped destroy the very people he had spent a lifetime serving. Judge Hastings looked toward Clara. Miss Whitmore, no lawful marriage can be built upon coercion or deception. She spoke clearly enough for everyone present to hear. The proposed marriage between Clara Whitmore and Edwin Blackwell is permanently canceled. Relief washed across Clara's face. For the first time in months, she felt completely free. Judge Hastings nodded toward Sheriff Briggs. Sheriff. Nathan Briggs stepped forward. Edwin finally tried to protest. This is a misunderstanding. The sheriff gently but firmly placed handcuffs around his wrists. I believe the evidence says otherwise. Without anger or celebration, Nathan escorted Edwin from the courtroom. The heavy doors closed quietly behind them. Inside, Henry Whitmore remained standing where he was. He looked at his daughter with eyes filled not with disappointment, but regret. Slowly, he crossed the courtroom. Clara. She turned toward him. Tears filled his eyes before words ever came. I believed I was protecting our family's future. His voice broke. I never stopped to ask what future you wanted. Clara's own eyes filled with tears. Henry bowed his head. Can you forgive your old father? For a long moment neither spoke. Then Clara stepped forward and embraced him. I already have. Around them, many in the courtroom quietly wiped away tears of their own. Sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones willing to admit they were wrong. Months passed. Spring returned to the Colorado Valley, bringing green pastures, blooming wildflowers, and fresh hope. Clara visited Jacob Carter's ranch often at first. Then she stayed a little longer each visit. Eventually, she realized she had stopped searching for another place to belong. One evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains, Jacob repaired a gate while Clara gathered wildflowers beside the pasture. He leaned against the fence and smiled. "I've spent a lot of years believing a lonely trail was enough." Clara looked at him. "But it isn't anymore." Jacob removed his black hat and met her eyes. "I don't want to face life's trail alone." A gentle smile spread across Clara's face. Without saying another word, she stepped beside him and slipped her hand into his. Neither needed to promise anything. Their joined hands said enough. Before we finish today's story, thank you for riding this trail with us. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who believes courage and kindness can still change lives. We'd be honored to welcome you back for more unforgettable journeys across the American frontier. Many years later, Jacob and Clara sat on the porch of the ranch house while their children played beneath the cottonwood trees. One curious child climbed onto Jacob's knee. "Pa," the little one asked, "how did you and Mama first meet?" Jacob looked toward Clara, who smiled exactly as she had the day hope first returned to her life. He chuckled softly and answered, "The greatest journey I ever made began the day a frightened bride climbed into my wagon." The morning sun rose over the Colorado mountains, bathing the peaceful ranch in golden light as another hopeful day began. Fade out on the Colorado sunrise,